Today we are going to be discussing women in art in the Renaissance. As I have said, in the Middle Ages, most women, they were craftsmen and it was a religious art, and they were mostly anonymous. However, in the Renaissance, it was the age where people started to paint other secular things besides religious art, and they put most of their names in their paintings. And we are going to be talking about female painters of the Renaissance. And most of these female painters were the daughters of famous painters, and that is how they became famous and became painters in their own right. But before I begin talking about the female artists, we are going to be talking about the famous models of the Renaissance, because that was the era of the supermodel days. Famous model Simonetta Vespucci. Simonetta was the wife of Marco Vespucci, who was a distant cousin of Amerigo Vespucci. And Amerigo is one who North America and South America is named after. They met in 1469 at a church in Genoa, and they quickly got married in Florence. She was known to be very beautiful, and she had many admirers. One of them was Giuliano de' Medici, for in his tournaments he always held a painting, a portrait of Simonetta. And the other one is the famous Sandro Botticelli. Botticelli was admired by her beauty, and he began to use her as a model for many of these famous works. Some of these works are The Birth of Venus and Primavera. Simonetta died of tuberculosis in 1476, and she was 23 years old. Okay, it was said that Botticelli was known to be in love with her, and upon his death, he wished to be buried under her feet at the Ognissanti Church, which was patronized by the Vespucci family, and his wish was granted. And to this day, you can go into the chapel and you can see his grave, which is right 3 feet under Simonetta's tomb. So they still lie together to this day. And this is a famous portrait of Simonetta, which is called Portrait of a Woman, and many people believe it to be Simonetta by Botticelli. The next female model is Genova Da Vinci. She is a model for the famous painting Genova Da Vinci. Genova Da Vinci was the wife of Luigi Niccolini. She married him at 16 years old. In order to commemorate her marriage to Luigi, Leonardo da Vinci created a portrait of her. She was known for her beauty and intellect, and she attracted many famous admirers in Florence, and she was the subject of many of their poems. These poems were created by Cristoforo Landino, Alessandro Bracci, and Lorenzo de' Medici. And her claim to fame is that her portrait is the only Leonardo da Vinci portrait in America, and is in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And this is the famous portrait of Genova Da Vinci. And of course, the Mona Lisa. This is the story of the woman who inspired the Mona Lisa. Lisa Gherardini came from an old aristocratic family in Florence, and she did not have much influence or wealth. When she was 15, she married Francisco del Giocondo, who was a wealthy and successful merchant. Historians believe that because her dowry was only 170 florins, which was not much, that it must have been a love match because Francisco accepted it anyway. And this helped Lisa to increase her status in the Florentine circle because she had a higher status, and she lived a wealthy and middle-class life. In 1499, Francisco became an official, and he was known to have ties with the Medici, and this in turn helped him create a portrait for his wife. He commissioned Leonardo da Vinci to paint a portrait of his wife in 1503, and Lisa gave birth to 5 children. Francisco died of a plague in 1538. Lisa took ill and was taken in by her daughter Ludovica to the Saint Ursula convent, where she died at age 63. Lisa Gherardini never did see the Mona Lisa. She and her husband never did because Leonardo never gave the Mona Lisa to him, but instead he took that painting with him to France. Now, it is kind of a ripoff to Francisco del Giocondo because he paid him that money to paint the Mona Lisa. However, he in turn never received it, so it must have been a ripoff to him. However, because of art, and it is a good thing that Francisco never received it because it became famous in France and it was highly promoted, and it becomes one of the most famous painting in the Renaissance. And this is a portrait of the Mona Lisa. Female artist is Properisa de Rossi, and she was born into a noble family of Bologna. And shortly after she was born, her father was released from prison, for he was guilty of manslaughter, so he just released from prison after serving his time. And she studied under the Bolognese artist and engraver Marcantio Raimondi for painting and drawing, but she became more interested in carving and sculpting, and she becomes one of the first sculptors of the Renaissance. She started her career by carving cherries and peaches, and then later on she moved on to marble bas-reliefs. Her significant career was between 1525 and 1526. She created a number of marble bas-reliefs facades for a church in Bologna. Her most famous work was a piece called Joseph and Potiphar's Wife, which in the Bible, Joseph was a slave and he worked for the family called Potiphar, for an Egyptian family whose head was Potiphar. Potiphar's wife was attracted to him and she made advances of him which she refused, and in order to get back at him, she accused him of sexual harassment, and Joseph was in jail. And so this is the supposed famous portrait of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. However, she was paid poorly for this work because a fellow artist named Amico Asperantini was jealous of her and he bad-mouthed her. Properzia was known for her temper, for court record shows that she was accused of vandalism in 1520 and that she assaulted a fellow artist out of jealousy in 1525. She spent the rest of her life working on copper engravings. She fell ill and died in 1530. Records show that the Pope asked to meet her, but she died just a few days before his arrival. Records also show that she left behind a lover who vowed he would never marry anyone else in honor of their love. She is one of the few female artists mentioned in Vasari's Lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects. The next woman is Lavinia Turley, and she was a court painter after Hans Holbein in the court of Henry VIII and the Tudor eras, because she stayed from Henry VIII to Elizabeth I, and it is interesting that she is not as well known as Hans Holbein. Lavinia was born in Bruges. Her father, Simon Benning, and grandfather, Alexander Benning, were famous miniaturists. Lavinia followed in their footsteps. She studied painting with her father in Bruges and was a well-known artist in the late 1530s. By 1545, she married George Turley, and Henry VIII chose her to be the court painter after Hans Holbein's death. She was given £40 per annum, which was the most expensive ever paid to a court painter in England until the end of the 1500s. She painted all of his children, including one of Elizabeth as a young girl, and this is a portrait that she painted of Elizabeth as a young girl. And during Mary's reign, she painted her mostly at prayer or religious ceremonies. However, Elizabeth valued her more, and she gave her valuable gifts. In 1566, Lavinia's husband was given a property in Stepney. Lavinia, George, and their son Marcus were given English citizenship. She continued to be a court painter till her death in 1576. And scholars believe that the portrait of a lady she had painted may actually be her self-portrait. This is because the sitter is wearing an ornamental dice, and the Flemish word for dice is terlink. This is a famous woman. Did you know that around 50 years, when Leonardo da Vinci painted his Last Supper, so did a woman. She created her own version. Well, this woman was Sister Plautilla Nelli. She was born Policina and was the daughter of a Florentine fabric merchant. At the age of 14, she entered a Dominican convent and changed her name to Plautilla. Their convent was run by Savonarola. He was the famous monk that was persecuting heretics. However, he did do one thing. He was for devotional religious art, and he made other convents to take up religious devotional paintings. Thus, many of the nuns took up painting, and it became a center of religious art. And Plautilla, she taught herself how to paint by studying the works of Agnolo Bronzino and Andrea del Sarto. She focused on using emotion in her paintings, and her male subjects were known to have feminine characteristics. This was because at that age, it was illegal for women to study nude male models, and so she had to rely on studying the corpses of her deceased female nuns. Now, can you imagine how devoted she was to her art, to study the deceased bodies of her female nuns? However, she gained popularity among the Florentine nobles, who considered her works to be holy. She is one of the few female artists mentioned in Vasari's Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. Her most famous work is The Last Supper, which is preserved in the Basilica of Santa Maria Novella. She is the first woman to have painted on the subject, The Last Supper. Before her, no woman had ever attempted to master it. And currently, this piece is undergoing restoration, and it is scheduled to be completed in October of 2019. And this is one of her portraits, the Grieving Madonna. And this is her version of the Last Supper, which, as you can see, most of them have feminine qualities in them. The next female artist is Catharina van Hemisen. Catharina was the daughter of the famous Flemish artist John van Hemisen. She studied under him and collaborated on his best-known works. 10 paintings were dated between 1548 and 1552, and they have been attributed to her, as well as 8 small portraits of women and 2 religious works. In 1554, she married Chrétien de Maurian, the organist of Antwerp Cathedral, and historians believe that she may have given up painting after their marriage because there are no works after 1554. In 1556, the couple were invited to the court of Queen Mary of Hungary, regent of the Low Countries, where they enjoyed her patronage for 2 years when the queen died. After the queen's death, Catharina was given a generous portion that would set her for life. They moved back to Antwerp, where the couple remained childless. Catharina's most famous works is her self-portrait, Catharina de Hemisen, painted myself in 1548, and this portrait hangs in the Basley Museum. She is also one of the first Flemish women artists to ever be documented. And this is her self-portrait, Catharina van Hemisen. As you can see, she is currently painting in this portrait. The next woman is a famous Renaissance artist, Sofonisba Anguissola. Sofonisba was the daughter of a provincial nobleman in Cremona. She was the eldest of 5 sisters, and all received a humanist education. She excelled in Latin, music, and painting. Her father arranged for her and her sister Elena to have professional painting lessons. They studied under the artist Bernardino Campi for 3 years. When Campi moved to Milan, Sofonisba continued her studies under Bernardino Gatto. In 1554, she met Michelangelo and impressed him with her sketches. He encouraged her and gave her advice on how to improve her artistic style. And throughout her professional career, she earned the praise of the art critic Giorgio Vasari, who composed the famous work, The Most Excellent Lives of Painters, Architects, and Sculptors. In 1571, Anguissola married Don Francisco de Mocanda, the son of Sicily's viceroy. She was invited by Philip II of Spain to become his court painter. During her time in Philip II's court, Pope Pius IV asked for a Sofonisba portrait of Queen Isabella of Valois, and she gave him that portrait in return. And this portrait earned her the fame and respect as an artist. And this is her self-portrait, Sofonisba's self-portrait. She is painting. In 1578, Sofonisba and her husband decided to return to Sicily. Her husband died the following year. In 1580, Anguissola remarried to Orazio Lamellino. In 1624, she met the artist Anthony van Dyck. He held her in high esteem that he included her in his sketches, which contains a sketch of Sofonisba as well as a written entry. 15 paintings that have been attributed to this day have survived. Most of the paintings that she painted in the Spanish court are either documented or unsigned. She is credited as one of the first Italian artists to specialize in portrait painting, and she is known for trying to explore the personality of her subject fully. And scholars believe that her portraits are stiff but charming. Her most famous works are the chess game, the portrait of Amica, Minerva, and Untitled Anguissola, which is her brother, her sister, and her father portrait, as well as her self-portrait in 1610. She influenced other female painters, such as Irene de Spilman Burgo and Lavinia Fontana, whom I will cover in a few moments. And this is a portrait of Sofonisba's sister Elena. And this is the family portrait of Minerva Amicare and Andrew. This is her brother, her father, and her sister. And then this is a chess game, which is her sisters and Sofonisba playing chess. Another Renaissance female portrait artist is her sister Lucia Anguissola. However, she is not as famous as her sister, and many biographers believe that the reason why she is not as famous as her sister is because she died young, whereas her sister lived a long life. Had Lucia lived longer, then she would probably have been just as famous. She was the sister of Sofonisba, and she trained with her in art. In the 1560s, she painted a portrait of Pietro Maria, which was praised by Giorgio Vasari. Her other famous work is her self-portrait, painted in 1556. And this self-portrait portrays her seated in a pose with one hand on her bodice of her dress and the other holding a book. She died in 1565 and never married, and this is her self-portrait. Irene de Spilman. She was the daughter of Adriano, one of the noble lords that ruled the small town of Spillenbergo on October 17, 1538. Irene was given a humanist education. She knew Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, and she also studied music. After her father's death, Irene and her family were taken care of by her grandfather, who lived in Venice. When she was 15, she moved to Venice and had a portrait done by Juan Paolo Pace. Irene loved literature, and one of her biographers states that she even dabbled in writing. However, none of her writings have been found to this day. She then became fascinated with painting and began to teach herself how to paint. She impressed Daniel Barbero, a connoisseur, and even Titian, and she became Titian's student. Her life came to a sudden end when she fell ill and died in 1559. She was only 21 years old. Many of Irene's contemporaries give a detailed description of her as an artist. However, none of her works have survived, and this is a self-portrait of Irene de Spilman that many historians believe to have been her self-portrait. And this hangs in the National Art Gallery of Washington, D.C. Diana Scultori Gysi, she was more of a sculptor and an engraver. Diana was the daughter of the famous engraver Giovanni Battista Scultori. She and her brother were trained by their father and worked in his workshop. In 1575, she married Francisco del Valtora as an architect, and she continued to design engravings, and this was done in order to help her husband get a job. For once she did engravings, her husband had many architectural commissions, so she helped her husband to get more commissions and to get a job for their lively fare. The couple moved to Rome, where Francisco worked as an architect to the papal court. There, Pope Gregory the XIII gave Diana an unusual dispensation to produce, distribute, and market prints in her own name. So this was the first of the copyright laws, for it made Diana the legal owner of her own work. While there is no record of her receiving her own commissions, at least 75 of her engravings have survived, most of which were produced for her brother and her father. Her famous works include Christ and the Woman Taken in Adultery, and Christ making Peter the head of the church. She died in 1612, and she is one of the few female artists mentioned in Vasari's Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. She is considered to be the first female engraver, and this is an engraving of hers called the Snake Holder. As you can see, there is a man holding many snakes, and people are enthralled by him. And this engraving is hung in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The next woman is a very famous painter called Lavinia Fontana. Lavinia was the daughter of Prospero Fontana. He was a painter, the leading artist of Bologna. Her father trained her to become a portraitist. Her earliest work was The Monkey Child, which she completed in 1575, and she completed this when she was only 23 years old. In 1577, she married Gian Paolo Zappi, who was another artist. She gave birth to 11 children, but only 3 of them outlived her. In 1580, she completed a degree from the University of Bologna. Lavinia received many large-scale commissions. The Spanish court gave her the first opportunity to do her first large-scale religious commission. Her work was an altarpiece painting of Holy Family with a sleeping Christ child. This painting is housed in the Escorial, which is a Spanish palace located in Madrid. You can still go there today, and it is considered one of the best masterpieces. In 1603, Lavinia and her family went to Rome, where they were invited by Pope Clement VIII. And this is a self-portrait of Lavinia Fontana at the clavichord with a servant. This is a clavichord, which is similar to a piano, and her servant is giving her music. Lavinia's best known commission in Rome was a painting of the stoning of St. Stephen as a martyr for an altarpiece in the church of San Paolo Fiore Mira. However, this proved to be a disappointment for most of her contemporaries upon its completion in 1604. However, this work is later destroyed in a fire in 1823, so it makes it unclear for us today to judge on whether that painting is a masterpiece or it was a failure. Nevertheless, she continued to enjoy Pope Clement VIII and later his successor's patronage, and her popularity continued to rise. In 1611, Lavinia was given a medal for her artistic accomplishments. She was also given the honor of being a member of the Roman Academy. Lavinia is credited to produce over 100 works. However, she only signed 32 of those works. She was known for being the first female professional artist to operate out of her own studio, and she was also the first female woman painter to paint female nudes, and possibly the first female artist to use live nude female models. And these are some of Lavinia Fontana's portraits. For instance, one is a portrait of a court lady with her dog, and here's the dog right here. And another is a portrait of a noblewoman, again with a dog, as you can see in her portrait. For some reason, noble women like to have portraits with their dogs in the Renaissance. Alright. Another famous female artist is Marietta Robusti. And she was the daughter of the famous Renaissance painter Jacopo Tintoretto. He trained her and she worked with him in his studio, where she became a well-known portraitist. She received invitations from Maximilian II, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and Philip II of Spain, who, as you know, has promoted a few female Renaissance artists. However, her father refused to let her leave him. She married Mario Augusta, a Venetian jeweler. Her husband agreed to move into their family home because Marietta's father did not want her to part with him. She died in childbirth at the age of 40. She painted many portraits, but she only signed one of those. Her famous portraits are her self-portrait, the portrait of Ottavio Strada, and portrait of two men, which is her only surviving work that was signed. And this is Marietta Robusti's self-portrait, and she is playing a spinet. This one is Frida Galley Zia. She is known to be one of the pioneers of still life. Frida was born in Milan. Her father was Annunzio Gallezia, a miniaturist painter. Her father taught her to paint when she was little. She was trained to pay additional attention to the details of real life. By the age of 12, she was considered to be a child prodigy. In her teens, she gained an international reputation for a portraitist, and she did altarpieces for Catholic churches. However, she is most known for being a pioneer in still life, and she painted many still life paintings. However, her famous works include Judas with the head of Holofernes, and this is the portrait of Judas with the head of Holofernes, Basket of Peaches, and Still Life with Peaches. Frida never married, therefore most historians believe that her success as an artist was based solely on her talent. And this is more of her still life paintings: the Maiolica Basket of Fruit and the Still Life with Peaches in a white porcelain basket. This is my bibliography. And that wraps up today's lecture on women in the Renaissance. And I will do the Women in the Middle Ages series in March for Women History Month.